All right, we have 5 people in the waiting room. So shall we just go ahead and start? Are you ready, everyone? Okay.
Yes.
Here we go. Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. This is Sarah Martin. I am the moderator
Bienvenue à tout le monde. Je suis Sarah Martin.
Of the Community of Practice, a product of the GBB AOR. I'd like to welcome you today to this webinar from where we're hosting the International Rescue Committee to talk about Empower, the Preventing Violence Against Women and Girls in Emergencies work. I am speaking to you in English, but this webinar will be in French today with English interpretation. So please use the interpretation button at the bottom if you need to hear English. And without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our fabulous Regional Emergency GBB Advisor, Noemi Del Monte from West Africa, who will lead us into a bit of an introduction. Thank you, Noemi.
Merci beaucoup, Sarah, our fabulous moderator.
Thank you very much, Sarah, our fabulous moderator, COP. I am Noemi, for those who still do not know me, and I am responsible for West Africa and the central part as well. And it's always interesting each time when we come in together, like you know it, for many countries in this region, in the West African country. It is a region that is basically Francophone, and also we have a bit of Lusophone countries. So today we are also trying to address our humanitarian crisis in the languages that we get. Now, when we talk about our COP and GBV, we are going to get information so that if we are going to be candidates for this kind of work, I think it is important for one to at least be quite competent in a specific domain so that we can be able to contribute. And in this community, we also share information, we also guide one another. And I wish you all a good Eid Mubarak that was celebrated. And here in some places, it's still on today. There are many Muslim families around. And I really wish you all a beautiful and festive time. So thankfully, I think it was yesterday that most countries or most regions were in the holiday mood. So today we are able to get back into the work mode. So there are also more information and other activities that we'll be sharing. We'll put them all, we'll make them all available to you after this podcast. And also we are going to finish with the minimal norms, the GBV minimal norms standards. So I think we're also going to talk about prevention and also with Sarah and the COP, because with the current situation, the COVID situation, and even the environment that most women find themselves in, we find that in lines of our development objectives are number 5, then we find that for many countries that we are a bit blocked. We don't know how to proceed in such an eventuality. So I thank you all, and I would like now to give the floor to our presenter without much ado. Thank you very much, Melanie. And it's my joy to come to present to you this new resource that will be available to us in French, Arabic, and English. And it's a great pleasure to be able to present it in English and French. And I'd like to apologize in advance. It is really me who delayed with the translation of the document of the kit in French. And since the presentation is still in English, but do not worry, that I can assure you that after this presentation, we are going to take your questions in French, and you will also receive all that you need in French. So this resource was developed for our sector, and knowing that we had, and it is available for the prevention of violence against women and girls, and used in humanitarian sector, and especially in situations of emergencies. And we are so that is in terms of directives. We are also talking about consequences, especially for programming, especially in humanitarian cases and others. So these situations should be contextual. So it is when we are looking in these situations of this. So it is in this light that we look at the next slide. So this resource seeks to really be a link or a way for especially when in the first week of the programming, to really demonstrate that prevention is possible, and it is something that can be thought of right up front. And now we need to seek to show that if this service is put in place, it needs to be the priority. And there are also certain fundamental elements of programming that could equally be implemented in this phase, but it would also that if we could contextualize what could be prevention in situations of emergencies. And we could think of an exercise of Uriel thinking about when we talk about prevention in different situations. And for this, we need to have certain innate principles that are part of our programming so that we can be able to implement this program. Because in fact, this needs to be the way in which programming finds its place, and we can also be able to achieve an prevention programming that also can also be part of what is part of our first in the times of emergencies. So we could also do that. We could change, so especially in this GBV sector, to also change our perception of what prevention could be in these times. So this is a resource that is composed of two elements. Next slide. So it is composed of a strategic context, which is very concise and short, so that the people, on the ground can get straight to it. And it is really a strategic concept that brings out the essentials of prevention, the hows and the what. And it is also accompanied by a practical kit, and that is a practical kit that you will also get to look at in this presentation, and to also link really this pathway, and also the beginning of prevention right from the beginning. So as we said that in this presentation, we are talking about the key elements of this strategic context, and also we'll also look at a summary of the tools that come along with it. So as the key elements of this ecological framework, we were able to rethink and also to redefine prevention, not only in general or when we are talking about programming, but what would be the minimal necessary that would help us define what programmation would be. So I think that we defined the practices, the current practices that we would define as necessary for all programming that is linked to prevention. And we've also listed or detailed 4 approaches, general approaches for programming. And now we are in the context of the context or where we are in the phase or the period and just how to implement it and 6 very practical steps which outline the past steps to just ensure that this program is in place. And in a very concrete manner, we offer examples of how to use the model in the ecological system so that we can also get to the analysis of the power that is intersectional, that could also risks and factors of protection, which could contribute to prevention and how that programming should take it into account. And also just balance the environment, especially for the families. And that is really a strategic framework that it's supported by research. But what is really important here is that this resource was not simply developed, it's not my creation within the IRC, but it is a work that reflects the knowledge of, covering more than 20 years, more than a lot of collective experience in this GBV sector. So we'll be able to present to you just a bit some of the consultations that we saw at the beginning of this project that we saw supporting this resource.
Ok. Excusez-moi. Donc, rapidement sur les outils. Donc,
So
les outils
just on the tools that, so that we are able to really concretize the elements that are part of this strategic framework in the sense that through using these tools, so we are really trying to effectively change, to transfer power directly to families, even in situations of emergencies, or even when they find themselves that they influence not only the programming, but also the analysis and also their participation in the prevention of risks as far as violence is concerned. Now, this tool aids a lot, helps a lot in the intersectional approach so that we are able to look at the tools that are adequate in such a sense. And we're talking about a very important process in programming that is of women, and then also through this discussion and also have some collective action in the prevention, which brings about transformative power of programming if we look at it from this feminist point of view and be able to also just bring it out next. Yes, this resource was created after, fed by a lot of experience and expertise of all of us here. And really the elements of the strategic framework, there are two elements that count when we are presenting. What are the definitions in this GBV sector? What is the definition of prevention? What do we understand by prevention of violence faced by women and girls? And what are the implications for our programming? And what is clear and what was clear after the consultations, because we were talking to experts, really experienced people, teams on the ground in the field who are really brave, even doing this. So it was a number of our members who also made it clear that the way we understand prevention is wider than maybe what we see in the health sector in general. Not only prevention as being absence of violence, but effectively, there is that addition in the sense that we also talk by extension of the rights and the powers of the women and girls. And this is really the feminist framework which informs our definition of prevention, and it is based on an understanding that we need to understand, and not only the systemic conditions that allow this violence, but we also need to address and also prevent violence, and also address the risk factors and the protection factors that may put certain women and girls at risk of violence in certain contexts. So there is that question there, and there is also the question of really getting to address the underlying causes of this, so that which allow this violence. So often, what would be the second point would be what we delink violence from phases, the critical phase of emergency. So I think that in the context of emergencies, it is not possible to work in the long term to simply not, address the underlying causes. And what we are proposing and what appeared to us after these consultations was that in reality, it is there that we need to go, where the prevention should take place, and in the sense that we can address the underlying causes of this inequality, nothing but just by beginning to recognize, especially humanitarian access to the families. So there, if we already know, the teams know their own power in these situations of emergencies, especially as humanitarian intervenants, and given the structures they are in. So we can address this inequality. It is an opportunity to actively, change the relation and to also show a more equitable relation of power, where we do our programming and not just wait for the results of our progression. We involve the women and the girls in the analysis and the decisions and the strategic decisions, and also ensure a sense of accountability even within families, whether that be those who are looking forward to empower and emancipate the women in the families, and also in some way that will have already taken care of the underlying causes, as well as the classic programming that we have, which also gives access to the reduction of risk, not especially as experienced by women and girls in situations, in emergency situations and the situations of violence. I know I'm already beginning to show a bit what these the necessary changes would be there to redefine prevention. Now, the second element, key element for this strategic framework is after these consultations and discussions would be, there are really the actual obstacles that are faced in this sector, because research shows us that prevention is possible, and in humanitarian positions, and also in the fast, especially in emergency cases, and all programming will automatically, there are certain challenges or important or key obstacles that are evident at two levels. There are those are more linked to the context, so that go to influence the, you know, the security of the women and the girls themselves. So we seek to identify their needs, where they are talking about opportunities and the time, or where they can participate in certain ways in service, and to also have the time to have to participate over an extended period in sort of what would be defined as service. And there's also the obstacles linked to the system, in the sense that we talk about projects that are too short. We do not have the very necessary funds to do what we need to do, and also we are a bit in a situation where we also have, in a way, we create expectations at the level of objectives. There are figures and numbers that need to, and at the same time, we need to be able to transform the attitudes and the standards and even the behavior in a very short time. And so there are also sometimes expectations that are created and they are simply inachievable. And that would also let us see that sometimes there is also the lack of, at the local technical level, we see technical gaps. And often when I put myself in this group that if I could go backwards and do a few things, the programming of emergency programming that I would do, I would do it knowing that many times, given the pressure we have, to orient, thousands of people, we cannot, there are certain things that won't change, that, the behavior, and also as it relates to violence, it takes time, but we could get there. And it especially over the long term, in the long term. So there is also the aspect of being able to, make the evidence that we have credible. So there are these technical gaps that sometimes erode into our efficiency. And otherwise, the other option would be to, in a black and white, is simply, move to an orientation that is just go straight touching the behavior, or we are just talking about prevention that just targets along the longer. So all that would enable us to have change over long term, in the long term, and also in the emergency context. And so we find that these, in the light of these challenges, it is something that help us think of what is really prevention in emergency situations. This is what appeared to be the response, that when we were seeking to know what is the programming about, the answer is in the how we do the programming. So the answer in how to do it in effect, is to find us in the manner so that we can also engage women and girls in a way that we can really establish what would allow us to follow this path with women and girls. So I'll also present to you the strategic framework that would help us understand such situations.
Donc, les pratiques,
Now,
les
the
pratiques qui ont
practices
relevé
that
chez nous en tant que
which
Emergencies,
were really highlighted
importantes
in light of our
de
sector,
toute programmation
when you're talking about all prevention programming, or whether it is the first few hours in an emergency or thereafter, there are 8 essential principles that so the first one is linked to ensuring the security and the well-being of the women and the girls. And the second one is used to, especially in the intersectional approach, when we analyze power based on gender-based power and based on all programming and its analysis. So evidently, change begins with bias, in the sense that we cannot wait to change, hope to change behavior in a community if ourselves, our behavior is still the same, or even the way we work or how we use our power before or with amongst women and girls. So these are some of these key principles of these strategy. And what is common to us is that, and is evident, is that the women and the girls be really at the center of all programming, so that it can really be a GBV app programming. Now, in addition to using the approach where we use the analysis that as an intersectional approach, we also need to be able to ensure that our programming also addresses these differences. You know, these intersections of inequality that bring about variations that sometimes can be quite critical, and also the strategic prevention, so that we can have an effective programming. So and that will really empower women and prevent violence. We must be able to have a strategy that addresses all inequalities. It should also be anchored on the realities of the context of the specific emergency situation, because all the violence against women and girls sometimes could be systemic, could appear to be the same all over the world, but in reality, they are experienced in different ways. So that means that our strategy should be adapted not only to the context, but also to the pathway that we use over time. And it also could be that we work in solidarity with women and girls organizations. So again, there could be difficult emergencies. So at the level of prevention, what matters is that what already are the strategies that are even before we, and it is also too important to know this so that the work can continue, it can be supported, and also to, you know, have the expertise or specialties, and so the people be able to work in association. It is also very important for the prevention programming, for it to be efficient. After that, there's also the community engagement, not only to orient them, not only to also involve the men and the boys, but also that they can also be really informed just as much as the women and the girls are. So these are also the concerns of the women and the girls. Could it be the messages that will not just raise the level of risk for the women and the girls? So we also need to be accountable in our practices. Also, when we are involving communities, why do we do it? Is it simply because we need to do it? Or in reality, we have a specific objective of involving them? So look at the practices that are really important, and these 8 are going to be really important if you're going to have a program, whether it will be in the past 72 hours or in the just after the emergency.
Il y a ensuite le
There
plan
are thereafter the strategic,
à la
the
prévention.
4
Les 4
approaches to
approches générales
prevention, and in
de
general,
prévention sont liées
when we
à
talk about in
l'autonomisation
prevention, they
des
are linked to
individus,
the
sont
empowerment
liées
of
à
the
la
women and the
réduction des
girls,
risques,
there's
sont
a linked
liées
to risk
aux
reduction or
vulnérabilités et aux
mitigation,
pratiques
and also
de
accountability and practices,
arrêter,
deterring practices to
éviter,
stop or
est-ce qu'il y
even
aurait
stop
vraiment des gains à
yes,
travers justement la violence. Et ensuite,
violence.
il y
And
a
after
ce
that,
travail
we
sur le
also
long
have
terme qui
this
permet de changer
work
les
over in the long term that
les
seeks to
signes
change behavior
vers
and
les
also the
comportements
norms.
en
And when you talk about individual behavior vis-à-vis the violence. Now, this strategic framework is it's more specific in the context of the application in emergencies. The first 3 are applicable, but the 4th is not, for reasons that we are going to see and I'll also explain. Now, these 3 approaches to prevention, the first being the emancipation of the women and the girls. Now, how does that work? And how does it contribute to prevention, especially when we are talking about the empowerment? There are certain responses. There's the, empowerment, risk reduction. So in effect, we see that sometimes we need to revisit our motive for prevention, which means empowerment of women and girls is also a form of prevention. And it also talks about violence in certain ways, especially for women and girls, because it seeks to support their opportunities, their capabilities, their strengths, and also brings in protective and also seeks to address a certain risks and also look at what could be lacking. So in the way in which the empowerment of women and girls, it's not a result in itself, but it is a process that could begin, and especially in a situation or emergency, and bring in a response. And then it also touches on the way in which we work with women and girls, and also who could also help in the prevention of violence, and also we are assuring safe spaces. There are other strategies. Is there humanitarian assistance for all, for example, urban movement? These strategic things could also seek to empower the women and the girls, and who can also stop prevention, violence in certain ways. Now, the second approach is that which we normally associate to that it is at the emergency prevention. Often we have this equation that in prevention that talks about risk mitigation, and that mitigation is based on the analysis of the factors that in each context, given the intersectional inequalities are there. That means certain women and girls are at risk of experiencing violence, and they are at risk of certain forms of violence. And also in this, that the program needs to address such so there's also the aspects of coordination in this sector, which is also very important in an emergency situation and which in general takes place. The third approach in prevention is that of one of our more of accountability, which is linked more to the levels of structures, including humanitarian structures, There are sanctions to discourage acts of violence. So this third approach to prevention is a little different. It is a little different in the sense that it does not go really to the underlying causes, because it does not change the behavior, but it simply stops them. So this strategy here is a bit in between the two, because in the sense that at the beginning of the accepting of responsibility by actors who are in structures that are at best are unequal. And then we put in practices that they bring in accountability. And these could also be sometimes linked to more formal structures that are also intersectorial. And we think more of what we put in place as we also continue thinking about what we are going to put in place, like when you're talking about sexual exploitation. And there are also, like what I said earlier, the ways in which ourselves we do our programming, when we are really seeking to involve women and girls, and also to ensure communication and also equitable sharing for programming. And the final approach, which is that on the prevention that discourages or stops the violence, and it is linked to individual behavior change, and probably what could be structural. And for this one, we need to effectively need some work in the long term. It is not impossible in say humanitarian context, but in emergency situations, it's not recommended, because there is too much change and instability at the level of the person's own stability, because normally there is a bit of like if there's change, and also it's at the level of structure or humanitarian structures that especially if the structure is not stable, and so it is for that this approach is not really practical in most ways, and it is not really recommended in the emergency situations.
J'espère que ça commence à ouvrir les voies sur comment justement on
I
peut et
believe
on
that
fait déjà effectivement de la prévention dès les premières heures de nos programmes qui sont mis en place dans une urgence. Je vais passer au prochain. OK. Alors, c'est très bien, c'est très bien. On a ces principes, on a ces approches.
So good, we have the principles, we have the approaches. So how do we apply them in more concrete ways? So like we are doing with this strategic framework, knowing that all our teams who are in contexts, in humanitarian contexts, or where there is a new emergency or a new crisis, or our partners who are in a new humanitarian context, we know that our teams take a lot of time to read the guidelines and to understand how to implement them. So what we wanted to do was to launch teams with 6 clear steps to help them define, or rather define this resource in the framework of the existing resources. We already have a certain number of frameworks to fight GBV in our programming. So how does this new resource align itself with this one? So the 6 first steps are linked to the 12 weeks of implementing a program, and this is in line with the
emergency response that was prepared by IRC and which can be used by other teams apart from IRC. And it's also a way to inform and address or avoid over-promising, so that we can work with donors by looking into what is realistic, what is the most realistic response from zero. It's a lot of work. It requires a lot of implementation and several processes, and this is where our implementation becomes very important. And this resource emphasizes on the issue that if we overcommit ourselves, not only will this disorient our teams, but it's also going to affect our credibility. That is why consultations with all of you was very important, with all the sectors, so that we look into this reality of promising many results which are not achievable. So these first steps puts us in the right context. And as you will see, in any emergency situation, we have to put services for women and girls. This does not change. Our message does not change. First of all, we have to provide these services. This does not mean that prevention should not start during this emergency period, but first of all, we have to put in place these services. The second step is to work on the team itself and do it in a very intentional way, in a clear manner. We need to look at prevention in our program, maybe make choices that are going to influence the next steps, because we are going to recruit our prevention staff in a more intentional way, using better tools. And we are also going to ask ourselves questions about our power and how we want to use our power, and how we are going to remain accountable to our practices, which means that automatically our implementation will be different and is going to achieve more transformation, which is going to influence not just our practices in emergency, but also the practices that will follow thereafter. So we give details of the activities. For example, how will we work between the office team and the national team? The third and the fourth steps are the most important, or where we'll see more results or more actions. This is where prevention is done in the first weeks. And this is the discussion that we're going to have with the women and the girls, where we're going to do a quick analysis, a real analysis of the situation, to see how the underlying causes of inequality manifest themselves. So this is where we look at prevention, such that these quick evaluations, these quick assessments will allow us to design a prevention program correctly, because we need to have clear conversations with the women and girls, and of course, giving a priority to response services. So we need to continue doing this. And what we are saying is that the conversations that we'll have in these 12 weeks are part of the prevention exercise. These are not additional investments that will help us design the project. It means that the design of the intervention, the design of the intervention is already prevention. It's a way of being accountable, and it's a way of empowering the girls and the women right from the beginning. And that is where we look at what prevention is in emergency situations. And here, this step of designing the strategy is very important. So will the strategies really be different? No, the activities will be the same, but what I will repeat again, and if I may talk about myself also, I'm not disassociating myself from this responsibility. I have implemented emergency programs, and I knew that we had to put in place certain strategies to reduce risk. I knew that I had to work with the WASH sector. I knew that I had to do security audits, but I'd never put why and how exactly, in the sense that I knew how to duplicate, but I didn't know how to really implement these activities. And I believe I believe this is where this resource tries to empower the teams. The activities may be the same, but the implementation will be different, and we'd like to be more intentional, and automatically this is going to change the results of the activities. It also changes the power of these activities. The fifth and the sixth steps are once again linked to diffusing or disseminating this strategy and working with other sectors, of course, through the analysis that will have been done with the women and the girls. So this is the strategic framework, which aims at redefining our activities based on evidence, and try to define how this theory will help us redefine our programming. We hope that this resource will be easy to digest and apply on the field. So the next, just before concluding and giving you the floor, I'm going to talk to you about the resource, give you examples, and also underline how the tool is going to help us implement this strategic framework, and to complete for you the image of this resource. So this is a snapshot of the pages from an excerpt of the strategic framework, and this example seeks to show you how we just don't want to show you the principles and the approaches, but would like to offer you a sequence of questions that one may ask himself or herself in order to better implement this strategy. This also shows us concretely how we can use the socio-ecological model to analyze with the women and the girls the key underlying factors that make women more vulnerable or create more risk for the women, and how we can have a more protective environment. And this socio-ecological model is based also on humanitarian situations. We look at the risk factors, the protective factors, which are well adapted to a humanitarian context. They also need to be applied depending on the context that you're working in. And at some point, we do not have a worldwide tool. So we are proposing here how this can be done. And then we see how we can all together analyze effective strategies. Then we can also define our approach, the approach to use in our programming. So this is a concrete example of how our strategic framework tries to link theory and practice. Thereafter, I'm going to present to you a synthesis of this resource, and to tell you that this is not the only resource to use, but there are others too. And these tools have been proposed to you. They can be used with other tools. And we also need to show you that this is not all the tools that could be used. This is just the beginning, and we hope that we'll be able to provide you with more tools to use in this sector. The 5 tools that were used to produce this resource, 2 are linked to evaluation and 3 for supervision. Of course, you say that these tools are the same as what we've had before, but each tool shows us what is different. For example, we are offered 6 hours of discussion with women and girls, 6 hours of discussions which are interactive and which allows the team to understand the situation on the ground and help reduce the risk and also identify the opportunities that are available to the girls and the women, and how we can take advantage of this. And this allows us to have a dialogue that creates a link between the women and the girls, and also brings solidarity between the women. This tool does not replace the group discussions tool or the quick assessment tools. These assessment tools are not outside the programming, but they're part of the 12 weeks. Because doing an intersectional assessment on gender power demands more analysis, a deeper analysis, which cannot just be done quickly. And then the safety mapping tool is the same. It is an interactive and visual activity to see how women and girls can live in the same environment and not have the same perspective on security. So very quickly, these 3 supervision tools also allows you to create equality between the team members. So we have many resources many resources for our case management team, for survivors, but we have very little for prevention staff. So these three tools seek to support the supervisors or the team leaders to help strengthen their capacity in offering equal supervision. So these three tools also seek to be accountable or to strengthen accountability. They help in recruiting to ensure that the staff recruited have the attitude and the behavior which help support gender equality, be they human resource personnel or whatever personnel they are. There's also a tool which could be used by supervisors during their visits to teams that are conducting discussions with women and girls, to see how we work with women within the community, to see how we can better have better questioning or better discussions. And finally, before I stop, there's a third tool that allows us to really evaluate from the beginning the capacity of the prevention team, evaluate the capacity of each member. This is an individual questionnaire which allows the supervisor to structure regular conversations regarding capacity and support, which are necessary and which could help the empowerment of teams, and to ensure that this is done in a transparent and equitable way between all the team members. So these are the Empower tools. I hope you have many questions. Sorry, the slides were in English. It's not COP's fault. It's my fault. And I'm going to send you the French version in a few hours. I hope that my presentation interested you, or you learned something. The resource will be available next week in English, in French, and Arabic. And there will be a permanent link on GBV responders. We will send you more information, and I hope to receive your feedback. I look forward to receiving your feedback once this tool is deployed in the field. Good afternoon, good morning all. I'm Philip Carr, Information Officer for GBV AOR, and I was asked to moderate the question answer session. And I wanted to know if you have questions addressed to Melanie. You can either ask them directly or you can write them on the chat. You are all invited to ask your questions. And you'll have other opportunities to interact with Melanie, and she'll give you more information on Empower. If you have any questions, please ask them now. And maybe I'm going to ask Melanie, I'll ask her question just to start. How was this Empower method developed? What's the history of this? What was the motivation behind the Empower method? What did you notice from the field to motivate you to develop this tool? And if I may, in a general way, we have more and more information. We have more and more research that was done, and we have really changed. We have really acquired more knowledge on what really worked in humanitarian contexts to prevent GBV. But often this was applied in more stable stages before conflict or before crisis or before displacement. And often the first phase of emergency was often forgotten. In the same vein, in our strategic framework, the real change that we'd like to see is enormous. We'd like to see equality between men and women in a context that is so unstable. The first phases of a crisis are often not presented in any logical framework. So through the years, prevention was not attached in this emergency phase. When I started this project about 1 year ago, when I talked to the first responders, they told me that they were not working on prevention. And I'm talking about our sector, which did not think about prevention. We reduce risk, but we don't talk about prevention. Yet this is something which is very important. We note that we didn't show the teams their power to work on prevention. So this work started more than 1 year ago, having noted that this was necessary, not just for our first responders, but also this has consequences or implications for the next phase. An example which may be familiar to you is that when we launch programs, we start with this awareness creation, we create awareness, and 3 years later, we tell ourselves we need to move into something else. So while thinking about a long-term approach, we noted that it is not in the programming that the problem was. We noted that if we better worked earlier in the emergency phase, if we worked better in the emergency phases, we could have better results. So we had wide consultations with GBV actors and the IRC team itself assisted. While I was developing this tool, IRC was responding to an emergency on the ground, and this was an opportunity to test the first version of this resource in an acute.
Nous a beaucoup aidé au niveau
so the team from Yemen. The team from Yemen helped us develop this resource, which helped us look at what prevention in an emergency situation could look at. So, dear friends, do you still have questions? If you have questions, you can always write them on the chat box. This is a good opportunity to learn more on this method or tool. Do not be shy. Do not be shy. Melanie, do you also have a question? You have experts in front of you, and you can also tell them how to integrate this in their system. Even though I was the leader in developing this resource, the reality is that it is inspired by our over 20 years of experience in this sector. And I wanted to know if, for you, what I presented resonates with your own experiences, and if you think that this redefining of our prevention activities is relevant for you. I'm interested equally in your feedback.
Quelqu'un veut mettre la main?
Anybody would like to ask a question? I will be available. I will be available, and thereafter I'm going to send you the presentation. If you have questions later on, do not hesitate to ask them. We have a question asked by Desiree. Thank you very much, Melanie. In Logone and Shari, colleagues are making a lot of effort to do prevention in emergency contexts. But with your experience, this will allow us to improve each day, since we learn each day. I think this is good because we are able to see the power that we have. It's the same for me. Every day I learn, and I had the luck. I was lucky to learn a lot from the sector. This is not just my own experience, but the experience from all colleagues. So we also have a message from Savio O'Donnell. Thank you very much for this presentation. I will study this tool in detail, but I wanted to know, are there any more trainings on this? Very good question. It is true that with certain resources, certain technical resources, there could be longer trainings, but for this resource, the approach is different, in the sense that since this was done for fast responders, it was designed such that a fast responder who has very little time to come up with a response could read this resource, assimilate it, and use the tool immediately without any training. The resource was created such that anybody in an emergency situation could apply it without needing extra training. So there will not be any training. But that said, there surely will be a community of practice. And even through this community of practice and AOR, there will be colleagues who are going to share the experience, who will share with you and with whom you learn mutually and respond to questions that may come up. We can always share and learn that way, but there will not be any formal training. So what are the next steps for the program? You've launched it today, this week, with the community of practice. So what are the next steps? The next steps are that we're going to share the presentation to you in French. And next week, the complete resource will be available in English, in French, and in Arabic. And thereafter, it will be one of the tools and one of the resources for the GBV sector. It's upon you now to use it. Still asking, are there any more questions? If there are any questions, you can put them on the chat. You can send them to me and Melanie. If not, you still have the floor.
Ok, ben on va peut-être pas tarder.
Okay. Melanie, thank you very much for today's presentation. Thank you for your time. Thank you all for having participated in our session with our community of practice. Tomorrow there will be another session. This session will be in Arabic. So if you have Arab-speaking colleagues and you believe it will be of use for them to participate, you need to go to the website of GBV AOR, and there will be details on tomorrow's session as well as the invitation. Otherwise, I don't know if Sarah has other information to pass or anything else to say. I know our internet was not very good, so we're going to stop there. Thank you all. And one last thing, Melanie, if you can add your email address on the chat, that way, if people have any questions, they can write to you directly. So we'll leave the platform active for 2 minutes, but if you do not have any other questions, thank you all. Thank you for participating.